Coach John Curcio, currently assistant coach with Queens. We're going to get into your story. So let's get into the part that I think all the high school kids want to hear us talk about. And that's the recruitment process. We want to go to Usports. We want to be the next big thing. What makes effective film?
They show me something that I say, this kid's got some potential. Show me the tape against the best team in your league, whether it's high school or prep school or whatever. I don't care if you miss shots sometimes, because you're going to miss shots in a game. If we see a kid that's yapping to the ref, we notice that, or in the off season, the CBL, man, the product is so good. The product is so good. Those guys can play.
John Curcio, Coach John Curcio, currently assistant coach with Queens. We're going to get into your story, and this podcast YouTube episode is going to be mostly centered around the application process and the recruiting process going to university. So there's going to be a lot of utility here. Anyways, Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Andrew. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. So currently assistant coach with Queens. I kind of wanted to start the podcast with kind of going over your backstory. And specifically, let's start with London Oak Ridge High School. How was your experience there?
It was great. Yeah, it was a great time in my life, just because at that point there, it was before the prep school days. So high school basketball in Ontario was unbelievable, the quality of it. That was back in the days of Quad A OFSA, AAA OFSA. So, just the caliber of play was so much fun. And, I was pretty lucky. I got to coach some really good players at Oak Ridge, and made a nice little run when I was there.
Yeah, 3 straight AAA championships, from what I've read. How was the dynasty?
Actually, it was 6, but who's counting, right?
Oh, 6.
There's a couple of quad A's sprinkled in there. It was great. I mean, anytime you get on a run like that, it was just really nice to see that success that we had just created that culture. Every year it always, when the season ended, we had a good year, and then you'd sit down and talk with your coaches, and you're almost thinking, well, how are we going to duplicate that next year? And what I learned really fast was, when you have a culture that has expectations, the kids buy into it. They really did, and I was lucky. I had great support from my school. Our AD was great. Our school principal was great. We had a ton of support that way, so it made it easy to do all the things you need to do to be successful, in the weight room, off-season training, and that sort of became the norm for our program, and it had to be, because we wanted to compete with West Hill, Eastern Commerce, Pickering, all the big boys at that time.
So back then, it's just a high school as any other high school, right? So you guys are most likely getting players especially over the span of 6 years, that are just from the neighborhood. So how
which is cool, to me, even more enjoyable.
Yeah. So what kind of challenge was that, not knowing what you're going to get year over year, as opposed to maybe like a prep? Because the AAA back then, like you said, is probably the equivalent of a prep school now. So instead of prep schools being able to kind of outsource talent, what was the specific challenges of keeping everything in-house, I guess, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it totally does. Well, the challenge was just developing them. You're right. Our kids were kids that all lived in the neighborhood, and because, compared to some of the bigger, parts of the province, our school was a school of, 900 kids. So, the pool, our tryouts were basically, most years, if we had 14 or 15 kids at the tryouts, that was your team, right? So the challenge was developing them. And what we were able to do, thanks to, again, the support we had from the school, and our guys really bought into off-season development. So what we started doing was we started taking it to our feeder schools. So we go to the 5 or 6 schools in the area that we knew those kids were coming to our school. Mm-hmm. And we would bring them in we had this program called Basketball for Breakfast, and we'd bring them in the mornings at from 7 till 8, and work on ball handling with kids that were from grade 6 to grade 8,
So
which we found that really helped.
So you probably knew some of the guys coming in while they're still like in grade 7 or 6 or 8, and before they come reach you at high school, and you've already got the work in with them.
Yeah. We got a chance to meet the kids. Yeah. We got to meet the kids prior to them ever stepping foot, as actual Oak Ridge students. We got to build a bit of a relationship with the kids, got to find out, what they were like. Or there's kids that really like basketball? Are there kids that, play multiple sports? Because our school was also a very strong volleyball school. So, you navigate that landscape.
From Oak Ridge, was your next stop Western, or am I missing a stop in between?
No, it was Western. Yeah, I was at Oak Ridge, and then I got a call from the coach at Western at that time, Brad Campbell. Just asked me if I'd be interested in kind of jumping on board. When he got the job at Western, after Craig Boydell, who had been there for many years, and Brad was his assistant, Brad reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you consider that?" And that was an aspiration that I'd always had. So it was a very quick yes. So yeah, spent a bunch of years up at Western.
11, from what I've read.
Yeah, that's correct.
But obviously, you're not with Western right now. How hard was it to kind of move on from an 11-year sort of run with the same team?
It was hard, because of the relationships you build with the guys, and it's my alma mater. I went to Western, so in London, London was my hometown. So leaving that was big, but it was time in my journey to move on. I was very, very fortunate. Western for 11 years, I got, I grew so much as a coach. Obviously learned a ton from Brad, and Brad gave me lots of input. I never felt like I was stagnant as a coach. The tough part was, the model they had in their athletic department. At that point in my life, I wanted more. Like, I wanted to do this full time. I didn't want to do it part time, which is what it was at Western. And so like a lot of Usports assistants, it was just part time, and that's hard to do it that way when you're so passionate about it. Mm-hmm. So and I got, as difficult as it was to leave. Brad, the head coach at Western, is, he knew, and he encouraged me and supported me and just said, "Hey, this is a great opportunity. Don't, don't let the door hit you on the way out."
Yeah. And that huge opportunity is SFU. Can you talk about kind of like the relationship between SFU being in Canada and where they actually play, and just your experience there?
Okay, well, yes, SFU, they play in the NCAA Division II. They're the only school in Canada that plays in the NCAA. They're out in Burnaby, BC, and it's the NCAA. So that was an incredible experience for me. I got they had a coach that was there. They had a lead assistant who had moved on, and just kind of through different connections, I was put in touch with them, and they reached out to me, back and forth, some discussion. They needed Steve Hansen, the head coach there, was looking for someone who had experience sort of on the defensive end, and that's kind of one of the things that I specialize in, or I'm certainly passionate about. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of talked it out. We did I think it was a Skype interview. I was actually on holidays in Florida. I interviewed. I tell people I interviewed wearing flip-flops.
Yeah.
Not a guy.
Yeah, and SFU being an NCAA Division II team, just talk about the year you spent there and kind of the ups and downs of that season.
it was an incredible year because the school itself. So Simon Fraser Place is called the Great Northwest Atlantic or Athletic Conference, which is unbelievable. The talent there in all across all sports. It's so good. The quality of competition was really good. So, it was, and the school itself had never been to the conference tournament, and it's all its time in the NCAA. They had never been to the tournament, which is, the March Madness, which is what we all go crazy for. Yeah. So, the year started off slow for us. And I mean, there was, part of it was probably, a change in defensive philosophy. When I came in as the defensive coordinator, my philosophy was, different than the guy that was doing it before I got there. So, the guys that had been there, especially the older guys, they were doing something that was, quite a bit different than what they were used to. And with that comes a little bit of growing pains. But we had we had a great group of guys that just, bought in, even though we struggled, and we started off the year really slow. But after Christmas, I'd say about the end of January, we just went on the road and beat the number 8 team in the country at their place, St. Martin's. Then the very next Thursday, we beat the number 11 team in the country. So we had 2 back-to-back, top 11 wins. And then we just got on a roll. I mean, we just got on a roll. We found our groove. And it's like anything in sports. Once we got there, we had some great senior leadership that just basically, we scrapped our way and made the first conference tournament in school history, which was an amazing experience.
So yeah, I read that they brought you in as a defensive coordinator as well. How is watching this COVID basketball where the number 7th ranked defense is 115 points a game?
Yeah, as a defensive guy, it's hard. It's hard. But it's the one thing I've learned as time has passed is that in these days, great offense is always going to beat great defense. The game is so different than So now it's more you want a defense that can just kind of hold the fort and disrupt a bit, as opposed to totally locking down teams. Those days are, I think, the skill level of the players today, and that trickles right down to to college, to high school. The skill level is so high that the defenses are almost always chasing, so to speak. You're always a little bit behind what the offense can do. So you got to come up with creative ways, and you got to come up with certain things that you're willing to give up and live with and work around. So yeah, as a defensive guy, it's hard because everything inside of me wants to to stop everything. But you do this long enough, you learn you can't.
Do you still get guys coming in that hang their hat on defense, or is it mostly people are trying to show off their offensive game and not so much what they can do on defense?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think a lot of kids today, and a lot of kids today, it's just more fun to go out in your backyard and shoot threes, do crazy step backs, do Steph Curry things. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, if I were a kid, I'd probably do that too. Yeah. But I think when you do find the kids that can figure out that defense will still get you on the floor. Defense will get you on the floor, and it is a valuable part of it, because today's game is all matchups. So if we're playing against a team that we know has a really weak defender, he's going to be exposed. At the higher levels, poor defense is always exposed. So like I said earlier, you're trying to find a defense and kind of can contain really strong offenses. But if you have those kids, and I wouldn't say they're rare, but they're fewer than the kids that just want to play all offense. I think at our level, when kids come out of high school, even the really good offensive kids, what they don't realize is that when they get here, the guy guarding them is going to be pretty good. So they better figure out that they better guard somebody, because if they can't, they're not going to play as much. So, kids that hang their hat on defense, I know when I'm recruiting and I'm looking at a kid, if the kid knows how to defend, or at least has a willingness to defend, that certainly catches my eye, because I just think too often I see kids that, and I don't know if it's the game, I don't know if it's whatever. I see kids that they don't have an interest in defending. So I always wonder, if you're going to get to the next level and you have no interest in defending, you're probably not going to play unless you're just so gifted offensively.
Yeah, that's something I noticed pretty much in every level of play, from college to the various pro leagues to the NBA, is pretty much in the last 2 minutes of the game, you're probably going to have your best offensive player that can probably create their own shot, a really good shooter, and then 3 guys that can defend multiple positions. So I think if you want to play in the last 2 minutes, your best chance is being one of those 3 guys that can defend multiple positions, right?
Sure. And that's when a team scores and takes the timeout and advances the ball, as the defensive side is going to make, defensive substitutions, right? Or ultimately, it would be ideal that the perfect situation, you got a team that you could switch 1 through 5. Yeah. That's not always, realistic, but even your 5's got to be able to at least somewhat contain a switch on a ball screen or something. Sometimes you have no other choice, right? Yeah. So it's if you can defend and you're competent offensively, you'll find a role. There's not a coach that would turn down a guy that can really, really, really defend.
And just to round out your journey here, SFU was 1 year, and then Queens gave you the call. And what drew you to Queens, and how are you enjoying your time right now?
What drew me to Queens was, just the trajectory of the program. I think that's a program that, I was at Western for many years, and in fact, that's how I met Steph Barry, who is our head coach, with my time at Western. And when Steph moved on to Queens, I kind of, just from for many years we played against each other, and every time we played, when I was at Western, every time we played Queens, there was a bit of a natural rivalry, because they're old 4 schools, right? Western, Queens, McGill, U of T. So there was that traditional rivalry, and we recruit the same type of student athlete, and I always admired Steph and his coaching philosophy, and I got to know him over many years, just learning the game. Spent a lot of time. I'm one of these guys that's I'm just a junkie for basketball. So in the off season, I'm going to every clinic, anywhere, just to learn about the game. And it was pretty amazing. Like, different times, I was in Vegas, I was in Orlando, and Steph was always there. And so we kind of connected that way a little bit. And then, I've kind of followed the program from a distance and just admired what he's done there. And then I think that the athletic department at Queens, and what their vision for the student athlete experience, and the resources they put behind it, it's unbelievable. The combination of facilities, academic support, the willingness to go beyond just the normal strength and conditioning, the resources that they put into mental health. It's like it's just, in my mind, it's how an athletic department should be run. And just based on I've been around for a few years, not all athletic departments run that way. And it's too bad, because it's like anything, it's based on what financial resources you have available, and a lot of departments, the reality of it is they are not willing to come up with with the right funding or a formula to fund the things that are necessary. So when I talked to Steph about the job that he had, and and I learned a little bit about the university and how the athletic department envisions itself and how it treats its student athletes, I just thought, man, this is something I want to be part of. And you know, and like I was telling you earlier, I'm really I'm a big believer that you know, that you can be a very, very successful academic school or an academic kid, and you can have a great deal of athletics success. I think there has been in the past, you know, that misconception that, you know, certain schools weren't going to have high athletic achievement because academically, you know, it was tough. You know, and I don't subscribe to that. I think you can have the best of both worlds, and you know, and I know at Queens, we're lucky we do. I mean, we you know, we all of our teams compete at the highest level, many for national championships. You know, our volleyball team, our hockey teams, our soccer teams are just, you know, phenomenal. And, you know, I mean, our tradition of our football program is unbelievable. And, you know, we got a new coach in the last couple of years that's going to turn things around. And so now it's our turn here for the basketball team. We're going to try to make a go at this.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about funding there, but I think another part of it is just how they prioritize things, right? And you talk about mental health and all the resources that they give to you. Yeah, it costs money to do these things, but it's also, it takes someone at some sort of management level to say, hey, these are the things that we should be investing in, instead of just, you know, what it be like recruiting or whatnot. But you also invest in the resources around the program, that because most guys are staying all 5 years, right? So I think that's another part of it as well.
People don't realize the demands that are placed on kids that play sports in university, and I don't, you know, every sport at university, the schedule is demanding just beyond what people would think. You know, for instance, most years we bring our guys in last week of August, and we're playing till, you know, the 1st of March.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, you get a couple of days off at Christmas. You don't get Thanksgiving off. So, you know, I mean, I love the fact that, you know, our athletic department recognizes the sacrifice these kids are making, and you know, the demands that are placed on them. And at the same time, like these guys, you know, they want to do well in school. Like, they're motivated to do well. So, I mean, we have to put things in place and mechanisms that support them, or else it's unfair of us to ask them, hey, you know, come in August, you know, bust your butt all till March, then do your exams, and then, okay, May 1st, now we're starting our off-season program. You know, that's hard on kids. You know, never mind the financial burden it places on you know, families and kids. It's just very difficult. And, you know, I know our kids are pretty fortunate in that they know that, you know, whether it's strength and conditioning, physio, mental health support, nutrition support, whatever, it's, you know, we're going to make sure that we do right by them that way.
And that's all the basketball stuff. And to get into Queens, you got to be scholastic as well. They prioritize grades. So you have all that basketball stress mixed in with the academic stress as well. So yeah, that's why the resources around the program are important.
Yeah, and we saw that. I mean, we want kids that can buy into that. Like, I mean, if you can't buy into that, even if, you know, I mean, you know, even if you do qualify to get in, but you have to buy into that. I mean, you got to be pretty serious. You know, and I do think most places, you know, subscribe to that philosophy. I just think we're pretty fortunate that we have, you know, a model where we can support all those other parts of the student athlete experience.
Yeah, and you definitely get what you put into it. So if you have to put in extra hours in the classroom to get to Queens, they're going to invest that same amount of energy back into you with those other resources that you were talking about, as far as those go. So let's get into the part that I think the high school kids want to hear us talk about, and that's the recruitment process. We want to go to Usports. We want to be the next big thing. I just want to say really quickly, just because you follow Coach John C's advice here doesn't mean you're going to get into Queens on a basketball scholarship or anything like that. These are just kind of the tips as he sees it, and it'll probably be applicable to wherever you're hoping to go to. And best of luck after that. But these are just kind of the generic sort of tips that we think will help you best to get into a Usports program. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of universal ones, and I think it's stating the obvious, but you've got to be a pretty good player. If you have to, and I think what I come across a lot, and a lot of coaches come across a lot, is kids have a hard time realizing, what a good player is. And I think the hard part, especially for high school kids now, because prep schools have changed the landscape. Right now, the majority of coaches are recruiting from almost exclusively from prep school.
Yeah.
So, when we go out and do our recruiting, same as everybody else, we're predominantly at prep tournaments. So, you have so much more exposure now, like as we talked about earlier. When I was at Oak Ridge in the 2000s, it was high school. Like every time we'd play a big tournament, in Hamilton or Toronto or wherever, there was always Usports coaches in the stands. For high school kids today, there's just, the reality of it is, we're not really going to a high school game. So if you're a high school kid that doesn't play prep, you have to understand that the quality of competition you're playing against is just not as deep as it is in prep school. And that's just the reality of the landscape we're in. That's really nobody's fault. So if you're a high school kid scoring, 20 points a game in high school, how much would you score in a prep game?
Right.
So, when you ask that question about, what's some of the tips, like, understand where you're at. So if you go to a high school, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, there are several Usports really good players that come from just a high school, not a prep school. So it shouldn't be a barrier, but there are some hurdles you got to cross. So you got to make sure, if you're a high school kid, that, if you're playing in a league that's, not necessarily strong or deep, you have to go, and whether it's AAU or club in the off season, you have to go and show your talent and develop your talent there as well. It's just that's the first and foremost thing that I would tell kids. If you're just going to a regular high school, if you're a kid that's going to Oak Ridge High School in London, that's probably not going to get you recruited. But if you love the game and you think you got some skill at it and you want to pursue it beyond high school, then you need to go be playing AAU against prep kids, against kids that, teams that are deeper and the competition is better, to really have an accurate gauge. I think we get a lot of emails from kids that tell us, well, I scored, 20 a game in my, league, and that's fine. And then they send us the tape that kind of shows us their game skills or their mixtape, and really the competition in the tape isn't anywhere near what a prep competition would be. So, I think kids have to figure out what their skill level is, and if you think you're good, go play against better kids, and then then do an honest assessment, right? I said, that's the first thing. The next thing, and maybe I put the cart before the horse.
I just want to interject one thing about the high school point, just to not completely demoralize everyone. But you guys have an assistant coach right now, Brady Heslip, who went to my high school all 4 years. He was able to do it, and we had another guy on the podcast earlier, Caleb Agata, who was also just high school and goes pro. So he's not saying it's impossible to go from high school.
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
And that's not what he's saying at all. But it is a major consideration that they have, is the quality of opponent you're playing.
Okay, so for the record, both Brady, when he was at Nelson, and
different times,
Caleb, and Caleb, when he was at Assumption in Burlington, they both beat my Oak Ridge team. So
Oh, so
anyway,
it's the first-hand knowledge.
but if you go back and you look at what
Right.
Caleb and Brady did in the off season,
Yes.
right? I would venture to guess that they both played club. They both traveled with AAU teams. They did above and beyond that. But at that time, there was no prep.
Right.
Brady, when he was at Nelson, they were, one of the better AAA teams in the province. Caleb, when he was at Assumption, again, a really good, strong program. They were playing at the highest level. So it's, now having said that, there was guys back then that were playing at lower levels than that, or smaller schools that were extremely successful. Right. I mean, but it's at some point, you can make it, but you have to go play and test yourself against better competition.
Absolutely. At some point, you're gonna have to show who's ever gonna watch your tape that not only can I do this against, the non-prep school guys, but when you put me in front of the good talent, I'm doing it as well, which is completely fair. You guys must get tons and tons of emails during the off season saying, look at this, look at that. So you have to be able to weed it out somehow. And obviously competition is first.
That's one of the tough things. Like we get so much tape sent to us from kids that want to play the next level, and you're watching their game, and it makes it really hard to assess if the competition is really weak. Like sometimes kids think that if they would send a tape to me and they score 20 points against a very, very weak team, that they think that coaches would be, oh, wow, this kid's great. We notice that right away. If the competition is poor, we can't really give you an accurate assessment. So it's like, well, hey, coach, I'm scoring all these points. Well, yeah, you are, but that's really not telling us much, because the guy that's guarding you is just, he's probably, great kid, works hard, but he's a soccer player. Like every high school team has 10 basketball players during basketball season, and those 10 kids are playing on the soccer team in the spring, and those kids are playing football in the fall. So there's, it's just a different animal. Prep school kids are just basketball kids.
Right. And what about OFSA? I'm assuming Queens and other Usports programs, they're going to send guys out to at least the end of the line in high school, right?
Yeah. Most OFSAs, especially, the AAAs, there's going to be a bunch of Usports coaches. Not as much as there used to be. Again, the depth
it's just changing.
It's just changing. It's the reality of it. But we were recruiting OFSA this year, and we know that we were down in Windsor, and we saw some kids that are in Usports right now. So high school kids, it's certainly not out of the realm, because there are so many still really, really, really good and dedicated high school coaches. Predominantly they're teachers, and they're coaches that have chosen not to go coach prep or are content doing what they're doing. So they were good coaches 10 years ago, and they're good coaches today. They were good coaches prior to prep pro basketball. So some of those schools, they're producing kids that can play. It's just, it's a matter of those kids there sometimes just have a bit of a more difficult adjustment. But at the end of the day, talent trumps everything. There's talented kids in high school, and if you're talented enough, you'll find your way. And
someone that I just learned that pretty well, Dustin McTaggart, was on early on in this, and he was talking about just the difference between what a prep school can offer you versus what a high school can offer you, in terms of just like, hey, it's turning into pretty closely into a job at this point, where you're gonna have a lot more focus at a prep school than a high school, and of course it's gonna result in more complete players, right? But it doesn't sit well with me, because you would love for, like, in a kind of utopia, that basketball is free, and that it's kind of just a free-for-all, and obviously not going to be a huge cost to some of these guys to go and play prep. But if you're good enough, you'll probably hopefully get seen regardless.
And I totally agree with you, Andrew. I mean, because we haven't touched on it, and you just did.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, prep now, there's the financial component, and as an old school purist guy, I do miss high school basketball. When your local high school team was playing against the neighboring community team, and
Right.
the gyms were full and the fans were going at each other, and the kids, kind of were going at it. Now, I think with prep school, as much as it has increased the talent exponentially, how good it is, I think the kids do lose some other value to the high school experience. And then when you throw the money picture into it, it's difficult. But I do, to your point, I agree. I mean, if you're a good enough player, and you do a little advocating, because now you do have to advocate a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, because like I said, Usports coaches, college coaches, NCAA coaches, they're not really going to high school tournaments. So, you're probably going to have to do a little, advocating for yourself and reaching out and that, but it's certainly doable.
So on the same sort of terms of advocating for yourself, how much of the recruitment process is guys that you went out and proactively saw and were on your radar versus how many of them are kind of guys that reached out first and said, hey coach, maybe take a look over here and see what I'm doing? So I guess of a traditional roster, how many of them are guys that you kind of had on your radar before they reached out to you versus guys that reached out first? Does that make sense? I don't know if I worded that properly or not.
Yeah, no, totally. I would say the majority of the guys on our roster, like any roster, are kids that you have seen and recruited. And we're lucky. I mean, as a coach now compared to even 10 years ago, like in Ontario, we I don't even know how many prep schools we have now, but I mean, really, within a 2-3 hour drive, there's 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 prep schools. So as coaches, we're out watching a gazillion games. Right. So I mean, pretty well every kid that I've recruited, I've seen. The exception to that is if they're out of province kids. Now, having said that, they're still out of province prep schools that come to Ontario to play. So we're lucky that way compared to like 10 years ago. It was really hard. If we're recruiting a kid from out west and sends us some film, we call some people that we know out there, we try to connect, and even 10 years ago it was different how film was exchanged and mixtapes that were put together. Whereas now you got a kid from Calgary, if he plays prep, he's in Ontario probably 2, 3, 4 times a year. Same with kids from out east. So for them, I would say the vast majority of the kids we see. Now there are some, that will send us film and that would be intriguing. So if a kid sends us some film and, he has something that we say, hey, let's take a look at this guy, then, we'll likely ask for more film. We'll reach out to some coaches. But yeah, for the most part, it's just, we've seen the kids because we're lucky because we're in Ontario.
Right. And I want to talk about film next because you brought it up. What makes effective film? So what are kind of like the biggest mistakes guys are doing when they send you guys film? And what should they be doing when they're sending film to coaches?
Okay, well, the biggest mistake, that's not the right word. Because I mean, right. As coaches, I think we all appreciate the time that kids put into this. Obviously, when an athlete makes a tape, he's doing that because it's important to him. Right. So, I never want to say mistakes that they're making. What I think, I'd rather just frame it like, here's some things you need to be doing. Number one, if you can avoid, and sometimes you can't, and COVID has shown us, just standing in the gym shooting with your buddy rebounding for you doesn't really tell us much, right? So I think, we often get film and just guys just banging down, shots, and, no one's contesting it. It's not really at game speed. It can be edited, and sometimes it's pretty obvious if it is or not. right? So, those things are tough. But if you're going to send a coach a tape and the only thing you can send is you working out with your buddy rebounding, I want to see you like going hard at game speed. I don't care if you miss shots sometimes because you're going to miss shots in the game, but just to go a little harder, and sometimes that's difficult to do when you're by yourself. And sometimes, the tape that we get doesn't really show what you can do. If you're going by yourself, it doesn't show who you can guard, as we talked about earlier. Like sometimes, when we're looking at players in a game and we're trying to, in our mind, say, when he comes to Usports, what position can he guard? Well, if you're in a gym shooting by yourself, I can't tell you can guard. And then that goes to my other point. If you're going to show us a game where you scored 20 points against the worst team in the league, again, we almost dismiss that sometimes. So I'd rather, and I always ask kids, if we're pursuing someone, they send me some tape and they show me something that I say, this kid's got some potential. I want to say, show me the tape against the best team in your league, whether it's high school or prep school or whatever. Now, obviously in prep school, the teams are all, relatively good. But so if you're a high school kid, show me the game that was the toughest team you played against. Or show me the game where they were playing box and one on you, or show me the game, where it was difficult for you. How did you deal with a game where you weren't making shots? Did you have an impact in the game with your rebounding, with your defending, with, other ways? So, the workout tape when you're just by yourself shooting doesn't really say much. So that's one thing that I wish kids would just, if I could help them that way, that's what I would tell them.
Just really quickly about, because I think you're about to move away from it, but we talked a while ago and you were talking about the one thing that does translate in an empty gym is athleticism, right? Were you talking about like maybe, if you're shooting uncontested shots in the gym with your buddy, that's probably not going to go over well, but you can still show, how you're doing athletically.
Yeah. I mean, that's right. I mean, because sometimes, you see a kid and he's shooting some threes and he's making some threes. And then it's like, well, like, can he move at a level that he needs to move at? So if on your tape, you can show us how athletic you are, that always helps. And, and that's not mean like, we always get tapes where, there's kids that just throw down all these crazy dunks, but then they can't dribble. So, I mean, hey, let us know that you can play above the rim or do some things like, lately we've been getting some really good tapes of kids sending us them actually working out in the gym. So how strong a kid is. You can see what his vertical is. You can see, how much you can squat, how much you can bench. So at least it gives you more information. So, I mean, that can help. Every bit of information that can help, is going to, support your cause and get a coach's attention. Sorry,
so you're about to go. Yeah, you were going to go into a second point before I cut you off. So I hope you didn't lose that train of thought.
No. The next thing, make sure your academic piece when you're communicating to us is taken care of. Like I think, each school is a little bit different. That's just how it is. But when you're reaching out to coaches, let them know what you're interested in at their school. Let them know honestly what your average is. I mean, I often get the email.
You're going to see the transcript. You guys will see the transcript at some point, so you can't lie.
Exactly. Yeah. My average is in the high 70s. So we usually shave off about 15%. No, not 15, but you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So just be honest. I think that's the point. Be honest about your academic standing. That way we can work with you. Like every coach at every school, if he has some interest in you, even if you're not quite at the academic benchmark that you need to be at, if you're honest and upfront and I'm interested in you, okay, well, we need you to be at 80. Right now you're at 77. Okay. Here's what we need to do. If you want Queens or you want Western or you want U of T or you want wherever, whatever their benchmark is, that coach will help you. It doesn't really help when kids send us, oh, I'm high 70s. Now we want to know exactly what that means So like you said, like eventually we will see a transcript, but now any kid can screenshot their transcript.
Right.
Any, so we know right away. So just don't, be honest where you are academically.
Right.
That's really important too.
Right. And going back to film, I want to think about like the email as a whole. So if there's a kid right now or in the future that's sitting at home thinking about, okay, how do I communicate with the coach? What needs to be in that first sort of contact? Like just the format of the email, like what are they talking about? How long is that first piece of film that they send you, etc.? What is like the, I guess, most efficient way to communicate to a coach?
Well, I think, and again, it's hard because kids are very well intentioned, and I certainly respect the kids that spend a lot of time on emails. But a really big email, 2-page, history, background, this and that, most coaches just don't have the time to look at those because we get, we get hundreds and hundreds of those. So if everyone was that long, I'd just spend my whole day reading those. I think what coaches just want to know, is your key basketball stuff. I'm honest. I'm 6'7" with shoes, or I'm 6'5" without shoes. I think, one of the things that's a big turn off. And again, much like the grades, the sad part is, if you're not 6'7", don't say you are. Because eventually, that'll come out, and that also tells us something about you. I mean, hey, if you're 6'6", okay, and you say you're 6'7", we can kind of do that. But it's really difficult when you're telling a coach something that's a little far fetched. So we want to know your stats, like how tall you are, how much you weigh, what position you play. Obviously, you're going to tell us what school you're at, and then I'm interested in whatever. I'm interested in health sciences at your school. My average is this. Here's my tape, right? And then usually, include, well, here's my club coach's name, and here's my high school coach's name. And then in the tape, it doesn't have to be long. Really, we just want to see some various clips, because if it is long, we won't watch much. I wouldn't say much of it, but it's sometimes it gets put on the back burner because don't absolutely at the first contact avoid sending the full game of something, because most coaches just don't have time to sit for an hour and a half and watch a whole game. So the initial video, for me anyways, I like, hey, can you make a 3-minute mixtape of you against good competition, showing us what you can do? And it doesn't have to be shooting. I think kids have this misconception, you got to show me that I can shoot a 3. Well, if you can't shoot a 3, don't, because every kid's going to put in the mixtape, the 1 3 out of 11 that he made. Right. Show us what you do well. If it's rebounding, then in that mixtape, show me yourself rebounding against big guys. If it's you go by people and make others better by dishing out, show me that. And if you can, it always intrigues me, and I'm only speaking for myself here, but I think I probably speaking for a lot of coaches, but in this particular case, I want to see the kid do something defensively, whatever.
Oh, yeah,
I always right. I always love it when a kid mentions, "Oh, coach, I'm a lockdown defender." Well, then you watch him play, he's not really a lockdown defender. But I always like when a kid puts in his mixtape, he's really guarding somebody well, because again, it's more information.
So obviously the quality of mixtapes have probably gotten substantially better over the last at least few years, because kids aren't just sending them to coaches, they're putting on their Instagrams, right? Have you had a problem yet with any mixtapes being like almost distracting with all of like the loud music and the transitions and maybe more facial expressions than actual basketball? Has that been a problem yet?
Well, yeah, it's a waste of time.
Yeah,
it's a waste of time. It shows me you got really good editing skills and great media skill. I mean, for me personally, I just want to see you play basketball. I don't need you to make a movie here.
Okay, so we're looking at about a 3-minute video. just the generic stats of what I'm like. And then also one thing academically that I think we should mention as well is on the student side, you talked about, saying what you're interested in studying at university. On the student side, make sure that you're taking the correct courses to get into that program, because I've actually heard some horror stories about that where kids had to lose a year just to go back to high school, take some classes, and they weren't really ready to even get into their desired program, right?
Right. And I think that's, yeah, I think, and I know, and I was one of these kids. I had no clue what I wanted to do in life, right? But I think if you have to understand now, if you want to apply to a program at any university, make sure you have the prerequisites, because we encounter that, occasionally, where a student says, hey coach, I want to come to your place and this is what I want to take. And then they send you their transcript. Well, you don't have calculus, you don't have this, you don't have that. You can't even get in that program, regardless of what your average is, right? So, it takes a little, it takes a little bit of homework on their part, right? If you're gonna put all this effort into a mixtape and highlight reels and all this, do your academic homework too, right? Because that, again, it just gives the coach a little bit more information and a little bit more direction. Because once I get that 3-minute tape and I look at it, if I'm intrigued, then I will follow up. We follow up with everybody. We send them, the stock thank you email. But if that mixtape had something that maybe we want to pursue, then we'll say, okay, hey, do you have a full game? Do you have a game against, the best team in your league? Okay, I see that you want to do a kin. Okay, you make sure you got your calculus and things like that, right? Then that dialogue can begin.
And how about the timeline? When should kids be kind of zeroing in on the process itself, like starting to reach out to coaches, or maybe expect that coaches are going to be watching? Is that like a grade 10, 11 thing, or how far along in the high school career or prep career will they be when it's time to actually start seriously thinking about these things?
Usually around grade 11.
Yeah.
Grade 11. And it's tough too, because often, if you're going prep, then you're going to do 11, 12, and your prep year. So some kids do it that way, but not all kids. So, now, you can get your high school diploma in 4 years. And if you're good enough, and you're mature enough and you're ready for it and you want to come out, you should be able to do that. So usually by about grade 11, when I like it, usually what happens is in the spring of kids' grade 11 years, I'll get a bunch of emails and, contact from kids. So that way, if I have it by their grade 11 year, that way I'll make a point, especially if they're a high school kid. If they're a prep kid, I'll probably see them anyways, or I'll have heard of them. But if they're a high school kid that's a little bit off the radar, so to speak, if I know about them in grade 11, then I'll make a point when the fall of their grade 12 year comes. I'll go out and watch them play somewhere, or I'll reach out and stay in touch that way. So usually grade 11.
Right. Before we move on, I just want to make sure that I caught all the Instagram questions. So I'm just gonna read off my phone. But
sure,
there's a couple, like how to get recruited in Canada. I think we covered that pretty in depth. There's one here about what is the biggest thing that players lack when entering college and university programs. So I'm assuming they mean skill wise. Like what is kind of like the intangibles per se, basketball skill wise, that you should probably have a good foundation in before considering Usports?
Well, that's a great question, and you for the most part you can't do everything well, but we always talk about if can you have a ticket that can get you in, right? So I can't say, hey, you got to be a great dribbler, great shooter, great rebounder, great defender, because that's not real. Like you better be able to do one thing really, really well, which will get you in the door. Then, it's what else can you do? So like, for instance, if you're like just an unbelievable shooter, and that'll get you some looks somewhere. And this year our team needed some shooting. So, we're scouring the country to find guys that can shoot the ball. So, I mean, this year we're looking for shooters. So, now
Brady heads up on the coaching staff, and you guys still need to, you guys can't just make a couple of shooters for Brady.
Absolutely. Brady, I'm blaming Brady. He's our shooting coach.
Yeah.
So, it's, but then once we identify shooters, then it's like, hey, so now if I've got 10 shooters that we've identified that we really like, well, what's going to separate shooter A from shooter B? Well, if shooter A can only shoot, I'm going to look at you. But if shooter B can shoot and dribble and go by people, well, then he becomes a little bit more attractive. So what's the one thing they're lacking? Well, I think sometimes kids spend, they're spending a lot of time doing all these static basketball drills, right? They're doing all these static basketball drills, or just, whatever, where as opposed to, play a bunch of games and figure out the one thing that you can do good. Now you have to work on some stuff on your own, of course, whether it's ball handling or shooting, but you have to be able to get in the door. So if you're just an average shooter, then you better be a heck of a ball handler, or you better be 6'9". If you're a really, really, really good ball handler, that's great. That'll get you in the door. But then to take that next step, can you make some shots? So, figure out that one thing that you want to do really well, and to just make it so that when I walk in a gym, it stands out. Like if I walk in a gym and you're a player that's a really good shooter, I should see that. It should not even be, is he or isn't he? I should be able to tell by looking at you that you are a really good shooter. That doesn't mean you made every shot, obviously, right. But if I come to a game and maybe you make some shots, you miss some shots, you turn it over, you kind of do okay, then it's jack of all trades, master of none type thing.
Yeah. That goes into the next question pretty well here. They asked, what are practices like, and how can I train to prepare like a Usports player?
Practices are very intense, and they're 6 days a week. So I think, I was going to answer the first question with what's the one thing, high school kids are lacking or need. It's like, I don't think they really understand how intense and demanding practices are, because, every roster is full of, kids that played at prep schools that were the best player at their prep school. And now, there's 10 or 12 of those guys on your roster. So the guy that you're going against in practice every night is just trying to take your minutes. So I think, practice is very demanding. It's very intense, and it's very detail oriented too, especially in season when you're prepping to play a game on Friday night. There's a scouting report and game tape that we've gone over of our opponent, but how you prep for it, I mean, you have to practice hard. You have to practice hard. You have to be relentless in your practice, and you have to be able to sustain it, because we practice, and I imagine we're on par with most teams for the majority of the year. I mean, we ease up a little bit, come the new year and playoff time. But from September till Christmas, we're practicing 2.5 hours a day. Plus, you guys have to lift on top of that. So it's very physically demanding.
And I think there should be almost extra emphasis on the high school players, particularly because at a prep school level, those coaches, and not to say there's not great high school coaches that can't replicate this, but prep school coaches, it's a job. So you're going to be practicing hard. But I know a lot of the times when you're playing high school, or maybe at a club level, and there's some guys on the team that are going to have a good time and just kind of play around. There's going to be you, which even when everyone else is playing maybe lackadaisical, you need to be on all the time when you train, right? You can't I don't want to say scoop down to the level, because first of all, basketball is supposed to be fun. And if you're playing club basketball and your team's not like top division or whatnot. Like they're there to have fun as well. But like if this is something you want to turn to youth sports, you have to kind of set that tempo yourself then, especially if your team's not going to get there naturally.
Yeah. No, you have to rise above it. If you if guys on your team are not, bringing up that intensity, then you have to summon it up within yourself, or go, find other guys to play with.
Honestly, when it comes, I'm trying to think if there's any other questions that we haven't touched on when it comes to just sort of the application and the recruitment process as a whole. Is there anything that you can think of right now that maybe we should touch on that they should know?
Introductory email with some tape. Make sure your academics are relatively in order.
Demonstrate your best skill.
Yeah.
Right, if you're shooting shoes.
Yeah. No, because then after that, like I said, the coaches will then take it from there.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do much more than that. And I always feel bad for kids that, just like I said earlier, they spend so much time on this presentation, and ultimately it comes down to, do you have the talent or not? So you can show me your talent in 3 minutes. If you can give me enough, 3 to 5 minute videotape, because then if I want more, I'll reach out, especially if I haven't heard from you. Chances are, if you're a prep kid, we've seen you. We know who you are. We know, who you've played for. Maybe we haven't had communication, but we've seen them all. The high school kid's a little tougher, right?
Have you ever had anyone that you went to go see that played well, but there was just some other of their mannerisms that just kind of turned you off to the player, like, talking back to refs or just abrasive?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, and I think I speak universally, for coaches. Like, we watch body language. That's really important to us. We watch how you deal with bad calls, and that's those red flags are big, deterrents for us. If we see a kid that's yapping to the ref, we notice that. One thing that, it's a small thing, but me personally, I'm watching how a guy reacts to being subbed off. And, we've all seen the guy get subbed off, and he's upset. Nobody wants to get subbed off. We understand that. But now, what are you, like you said, what are your mannerisms like on the bench? Are you sulking at the end of the bench with a towel over your head, or are you trying to lift up your teammates? Right? All those things, I promise you, coaches are watching those things. So if you're, you high school guys that are looking for some piece of advice, be a great teammate, be respectful of the referees. Take, when a coach gives it to you, you take it, right? If coaches are there trying to help you. So a lot of times you see kids that aren't really receptive when the coach is, trying to help them out. Or they don't like being subbed off, or they make a mistake and hey, it wasn't me, whatever. Like we always 100%. I want to see how you deal with adversity, or the kid that you miss a shot. Well, are you looking at your hands? Like, this one drives me nuts. Kid shoots a ball. Oh, must be my hands. Well, of course it's your hands, right? So come on, man. You missed a shot. Go get the rebound or get back on defense.
Yeah. It's you talked about arguing calls, and I just want those guys and girls to know that, like, when you argue a call, if someone's watching that game game film, or they're in the crowd when that call happens, they'll know it's a bad call if it's a bad call. So you can only lose when you argue the call. So it's rather you argued the call and they already know it's a bad call. What are you doing? Or two, it was a good call, and now you kind of look a little bit silly for arguing a good call. So
and like every coach has ever said, anybody's ever coached has said this: refs aren't going to change it anyway. So why waste the energy?
Yeah. So okay, I think we can probably put a bow on sort of the recruitment process there. This next segment, kind of more for the Canada basketball side, because last time we talked, we had a really good conversation about Canada basketball, and it's the self-indulgent side of me. I want to talk about that. And you are in a unique position where I didn't know the first time we talked that you actually coach a D2 program, and you obviously have this wealth of experience with Usports. And my first question is, how is it stacking up, especially in 2021, between the Usports program and let's start with D2, quality of play?
Well, I mean, D2, it's the best Canadian schools, the top, the top 12, 15 Canadian schools would be easily at the top of D2, easily. Mm-hmm. Now you take the top 4 or 5 in Canada, and they would be very, very competitive in Division 1. Obviously, Carleton, I mean,
right.
they'd be the top 25 team, right? I mean, they're just that good, and what they've done over there is pretty good. But what they've done is they've raised the level of everybody else. When you talk about Ottawa, Ryerson, and some of these other teams, there's teams that could compete in D1. Having coached in D2, I mean, the best Canadian teams would be the best D2 teams. No problem. I think what's the other observation I would make is, just it's economies of scale. There's so many American teams. The bottom end of D2, like all our Usports teams would beat them, in my opinion, right? The bottom end of Division 2, because there's 300 plus teams. Usports, there's 47 of us. And even the teams that are the lower end of Usports would be significantly better than some of the lower end D2 teams.
So, is it frustrating that you still have to deal with sort of kids that would rather just play NCAA basketball than Usports basketball? How do you sell, or have you had to been put in a position where you had to sell Usports over the NCAA?
Every day. It is frustrating. It's frustrating. I think what's changing slowly, and it's been nice. I mean, there was this misconception for many years. Like, I mean, I think a lot of Usports coach ask this question. Well, what's your end game? Mm-hmm. Why do you want to go to the NCAA? Mm-hmm. And is it to tell your friends that I went to the NCAA? Or do you really know what you're getting there? Do you have an end goal? Like, I'll be the one thing that I can say unequivocally: if you're a Canadian talented kid, like Usports is filled with Division 1 players. I'll be honest, it is. Mm-hmm. So those guys that are on our rosters across the country that could play Division 1, they have Division 1 talent, mm-hmm. right? But because of various reasons, if they had gone Division 1, the opportunity for two things. First and foremost, development. You can play 5 years in Canada, and we aren't as sanctioned. The one thing I did not like when my time in the NCAA was I was restricted with how much I could work with the guys. Right. So if you extrapolate 5 years of more practice in Usports compared to 4 years, and likely a year when you're redshirting in the States, mm-hmm. if your end goal is to play professional basketball, what I would sell you is that you have a better opportunity to come play at Usports, play 5 years, and in 5 years you're more equipped to go play professional basketball in Europe. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, you're Andrew Wiggins. Well, no, you're not coming to Usports. I'm talking about guys that have Division 1 ability. I'm not, mm-hmm. There's going to be the opportunity. And I honestly, I also believe that we're not too far away. We're going to have an NBA guy soon. I don't know when it's going to be, but we are. We've already closed that gap. Some of the stuff that Canada basketball has done with the U17s and our senior men's team now. Like, I mean, we're there. We're on par. I just it disappoints me now that in this day and age that we're still selling that. All the Usports coaches are selling it because mm-hmm. a lot of kids want to go to the to the NCAA, and sometimes it's kids don't want to hear this, but mm-hmm. you're going to go to, some small D2 school in, Idaho. Well, that's small D school too that you're going to would be the, the 10th place team in the OUA,
Mhm.
right? And you're going to go there and you're not going to get, and not because the coaches aren't any good, because they're really good, but their restrictions, the way the NCAA does it with your 20 hours a week, you get nowhere near the time that we do. I mean, in Canada. So, I mean, over 5 years, you're getting, I think, for way better development. But still, some kids don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that.
How do you, what can happen to like brand Usports better? I think it's just branding, because like you said, like, if you're in the small D2 school in Idaho, sorry to whoever that is, and you're going to end up 10th in the OUA, like, what does Usports have to do to better brand, I guess, the product?
Well, I mean, I don't know. That's a great question, Andrew. But it comes down to money, right? I mean, we have to be able to generate money.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that, the chicken and the egg here, right?
Yeah.
There's got to be a way that we can generate money, and I think the media, TV, how can we get youth sports games? When I was a kid growing up in London, Ontario, there was a CHCH Channel 11 game of the week of basketball. That was my introduction to basketball, watching, Waterloo, Western, Mac, Guelph on Channel 11, right? And so I think it's so mainstream in the States, it's part of their culture, right? So with that, with that thing, there's revenue generated. Usports has to somehow, in partnership with somebody, or somehow come up with a way, and I wish I had the answer, that we can market our product better, because the product is so good. I mean,
it's frustrating because, like, there's an appetite for basketball in Canada now, probably highest it's ever been, and their quality is good, but like, it's just, you're looking at it, it's like, I just need to connect these 2 points and that's it, and then problem solved. But like, I don't know, I couldn't quite put my finger on what that missing link is, why we can't make that jump yet.
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, and there's many factors, but I mean, again, I think a lot of it comes down to resources. Some of it's money, but some of it's like athletic departments across the country are just, understaffed, overworked, right?
Sorry, keep going. Sorry.
No, it's just hard for athletic departments, even on their own campus, to market it. I mean, it's frustrating that, every school in Ontario, that has residents built right around their athletic facility, that, most gyms you go into aren't packed.
Right.
And that's frustrating. And whose fault is that? Well, I mean, it's nobody's fault really, because there's not the resources where an athletic department can have just, a full marketing team that we're going to pump up basketball during basketball season, and we're going to get the kids on campus to come watch it. Then we're going to get the community come in and watch it. Well, the community, the game's on TV. Well, that drums up some interest, so that would bring people in. It's just, there's a lot of variables there, but you're right. I mean, there's a disconnect, and that's making it really hard to market a really good product.
Do you think the Usports will ever get to a position where not even paying athletes, but at least handing out full rides for athletic scholarships? Do you think that's something that could potentially happen? I know you're not, that's not your job to do, but like, could you envision that? Do you think that's on the table?
Well, I think it is. I think it has to be. Because again, based on my age, I never thought I'd see the day that, that we are giving kids money to play basketball or other sports, any sport, right? And now we have it. We have it where, kids, if it's tied to academic average, and that's fine, and it should be. I'm totally in favor of that. But yeah, I mean, we're giving kids money, and AFAs in Ontario have gradually gone up over the last number of years. And so, I mean, I think it's trending that way. I mean, I think universities have to recognize that, kids are making a huge sacrifice.
I think I made the first connection. You talked about Andrew Wiggins earlier about how he wouldn't play U Sports, but it's funny to think that Wiggins can go play college basketball for free in the States, but if he stayed in Canada, he'd probably have to pay tuition.
Yeah, well, that's why he didn't come to Queens.
Yeah,
it was us or Kansas. It was down to us two.
I think I read that somewhere for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But we were gonna get him a summer job at camp though.
You talked about end goals when you're talking to players and like asking them what their end goal is and how you can probably achieve that better at the U Sports as opposed to D2 Idaho. Have any guys expressed interest of playing professionally in Canada, NBL or CEBL yet?
Yeah, that's come out in the last few years, and again, those opportunities now that weren't around exist. And if your end goal is professional basketball, that's a really good point you bring up. It's not just limited to Europe anymore. It's not limited to Europe. So I mean, if you're a really good Canadian player that may catch on to a D1 roster, okay, if you're going to go there and you're just kind of on that cusp where they're going to redshirt you. Well, that year that you're getting redshirted, you're not getting developed as much as you are in Canada. Right. Yeah, you're practicing and whatever, but remember, it's limited practice in the NCAA. So you're restricted to 20 hours a week. Well, if you're redshirted, really, how many reps are you getting? But, you want to come out and play in the CEBL, you play 5 years at, some of these places and Usports, you're going to have a really good opportunity to develop and have that opportunity and maybe even move beyond that. I mean, they're every year Usports is putting guys that are playing pro in Europe, and now they have the opportunity to play in Europe for a bit, and in the off season come play, make some money in the CBL or the NBL Canada. Like there's so many more avenues because the game is growing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know sometimes I'm pessimistic about it, but it's definitely without question trending upwards. If we have this conversation in 10 years, I think it's going to be a completely different one, hopefully. And
yeah, I agree with you. I mean, just the game has become so much more global. I think, hopefully the Raps title a couple of years ago has, jump started it again. I mean, we had that little jump start with the Vancouver Grizzlies and the Raps, and then, the Vince Carter era. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think you're spot on. I think in 10 years, the conversation will be a lot different, because the kids are getting better. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, the kids coming out of prep schools and coming out of Canada in general, just basketball is growing so much. They're so much better. They're gonna make some noise. And like I said, it wouldn't surprise me that in not too distant future we have a U Sports kid that maybe gets drafted in the NBA.
Oh, that would be I'm here for that. I'm definitely here for that. And yeah, and like I say, probably every single time I do one of these things is I'm very ready to go out and actually support the CEBL and the NBL, because that's probably step one, right? When we talk about U Sports and Canadian Basketball League, it's the interest, and we have to express the interest with our dollars, and we have to actually go out to the games when it's safe and start building that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what it's going to be like in 5 years, because hopefully, Canada's a basketball hotbed.
Yeah, and the CEBL's done a good job of kind of making that connection with U Sports, because the people that are running that do recognize how talented the players in U Sports are, and I think that connection and that partnership is going to be huge going forward. And yeah, I mean, again, for an entertainment dollar, I mean, if you can't get to Toronto to watch the Raps, or in the off season, the CBL, man, the product is so good. The product is so good. Those guys can play.
Well, like you said, and I think how we're all feeling, it's going to be very exciting to watch. I wish you guys the best of luck over at Queens. I know you guys are about to get started again tomorrow, right? At the time of recording, you guys are back in the gym tomorrow. So thank you, Coach, for your time, and let's have this conversation again sometime.
Anytime, man. Appreciate it.